Hello and welcome, listeners, to our 6th episode of the Aha Moment. I'm excited to be here with my co-host, Amanda Kocherka. I'm Elizabeth Cipolla from Decision Associates, and we're here to talk to you today about interview tips from yours truly, both of whom have been working together, haven't we, as executive recruiters?
Yes, and we're going to share some of the things that we've found, as we interview a lot of candidates on a regular basis. We've heard the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to interviewing approaches, and so we're here to share from our perspective as recruiters what we look for, what we like to hear, and therefore things that you should incorporate as you interview for your next position.
So we're excited to be sharing all that we have gleaned with those of you either looking to find your next job or looking to fill your next job.
Had to clear my throat.
Let me clear my throat.
I think one of the first things that would be worth sharing is kind of jumping right into the ugly, if you will.
Yes.
What are some of the things that we've seen through, the various interview processes that we've led and facilitated? What have we seen that candidates consistently get wrong?
One thing candidates consistently seem to struggle with is wanting to jump right in to talking about all the things they want out of a position. Mm-hmm. And while it's obviously going to be very important that the hiring manager hires somebody whose wants align with what the organization's needs are, I think it's really important to first go into it wanting to build some sort of a rapport or connection with the interview team. Mm-hmm. And I always like to say, start out by just telling them a little bit about yourself. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I know that's a question that a lot of candidates hate getting asked. And in fact, whenever a candidate is asked that question, I think it's best to talk a little bit about things that give the hiring team a glimpse of who you are as a person mm-hmm. outside of work, because they're going to spend the whole rest of the time learning about your background, your skills.
Yep.
At the end of the day, they want to know if you're someone that they would enjoy spending time with, right? Mm-hmm. So I think it's important as a job seeker, as an interviewer, to remember the likability mm-hmm. factor.
There's a couple things that come to mind for me. I think one, not being able to speak specifically to accomplishments in previous roles. We get real focused on talking about the different experience that we have and the skill sets that we have, but we don't focus enough on tangible results.
Right.
And I would argue that this is applicable for resumes as well. I want to see, okay, you're telling me you created or managed X programs. Well, how many programs, at what budgets, at what participation level, on what topics? I think the more specifics you can provide, the better.
Yes.
So that's one. And then I think also coming in with some curiosity about not just the position, but culture of the organization as well. I think, and we'll get into this a little bit more in a minute, but when we see candidates asking questions of the hiring manager, a lot of times those are real focused on the ins and outs of the job itself and not necessarily the organization overall. So that's another area that I think always can be improved.
When you made the comment in regards to when the candidate can't speak to specifics, mm-hmm. it made me think of another one, which is sometimes candidates will go on and on and on and go way too long answering a question, mm-hmm. and they'll answer everything but the specific question that was asked. Mm-hmm. I always like to say no more than 3 to 5 minutes, and 5 minutes is a long time. Mm-hmm. per response.
Yeah.
And of course, everyone has heard about the STAR method. If you haven't, I'll explain it. If, for example, I were to ask you, tell me about a time when you had to manage a very controversial change within your organization. Mm-hmm. So if you, as a candidate, were to be figuring out how best to answer it, first you want to describe the situation. That's the S. Then you want to talk about what happened. Mm-hmm. Then you want to, A, You want to share specifically what actions you took. And then R is for results. You want to articulate what the overall results were. So that's the STAR method of responding to interview questions. But yeah, I would say going too long with an answer, not really listening to the question that is being asked. That's actually pretty common as well.
Yes.
Not being personable, being too stiff and not really showing a sense of humor, but also being too much of a jokester. In fact, let me tell you a story.
Oh, boy.
No, listen. So there was this one gentleman who we were interviewing for a position, right? And this particular position, the responsibility of it was to handle figuring out how to communicate very sensitive topics. Let's just put it that way. And this particular individual during the interview process was quite literally cracking jokes the entire time. Now, a joke or two, or maybe even three sprinkled throughout.
Yeah, where
that's
appropriate.
Fine, where appropriate.
Appropriate being the operative word.
That's true. Well, this poor guy, he probably thought he was being appropriate,
Oh, no.
but his appropriateness meter was way off. Anyhow, he was cracking jokes about someone who died and how he had to communicate that. Then he was one of the interview team members who would be working closely with this candidate, shared a very personal story that led into a question they asked, wanting to make sure, are you someone who can communicate with sensitivity and really be empathetic? And he just responded to that with a joke.
Oh,
basically, this guy was pissing
Read the room.
He was pissing the room off the entire time, and everybody seemed to know but him. I wanted a hook to come out and just yank him out.
Emotional intelligence is,
I know.
a good thing to have.
It is.
Going through an interview
But
process.
yeah, I don't know. I could go on and on, but hopefully that gives a little bit of a flavor of some of the things I've seen.
Yeah. So first impressions, we have one opportunity to make that first impression. And we're actually, spoiler alert, going to be doing a deeper dive into this on a future episode, near future, actually. So stay tuned for that one. But I think just to kind of hit on that topic right now, talk about that first impression opportunity and what are those, if there's 3 things that we say, make sure you do these things when you're making that first impression. What do you think those would be?
Okay, so I'm going to get really specific and picayune with you right now because there are several touch points during which you do make those initial impressions. For example, the first time you reach out to an organization, let's say you're reaching out to them just to see and explore if they have any openings. You want to make sure that what you present, whether it be if you pick up the phone and call, whether it be if you send an email, or maybe you have a personal connection and you send a text, whatever it might be, make sure that everything is spelled correctly. Make sure that you're short and sharp with what it is you're asking.
And specific.
And specific.
Yes.
Not
just, hey, do you have any open positions?
Right, exactly.
Let me tell you, there's no quicker way for me to send an email to a delete bin.
Yes. Make sure for that initial touch point, you're well-spoken, you're articulate, you have your ask, on the ready so you know exactly what it is you want to say or convey. And if you're leaving a message, a voicemail message, let's say, make sure it's no longer than 60 seconds, maybe 75. So again, short, sharp, specific, conversational, I would say.
And if you're going to be doing this, to Elizabeth's point, via voicemail or even if you get somebody on the phone, I'd practice before you actually make the call and kind of refine that ask. So you're comfortable, making the point that you need to make concisely. And again, I'm going to specify that you need to be very clear and have a point of what you're asking. Do not just contact them and say, hey, do you have any open positions? In what department? With what types of skill sets? I'm looking for roles in human resources that are specific to, analyzing HR data.
Right.
Have a specific ask.
The other thing, too, I would say is to, as far as a first impression, show a genuine interest and demonstrate a true interest in listening to your interview team. Don't interject and cut them off and start answering before they have a chance to finish asking you the question. Come prepared with questions to ask them. So, yeah, just show a genuine interest.
Yeah, especially if the interview is virtual, which I think can often require a little bit more effort than maybe something that you're doing in person. But I think in that situation, it's even more important.
Yes.
To show that enthusiasm and that excitement.
Okay, so Amanda, what about this, right?
Yes.
So I'm listening to this podcast, I'm a job seeker, and I think, okay, do all this stuff. Do I have to have my camera on?
Yes.
You know why I'm asking. What if some of the members of the interview team don't even have their camera on?
Okay, well, in that situation, shame on them, first of all. Secondly, that does not give you the pass to turn your camera off.
Okay. Exactly.
Keep your camera on. Camera should always be on. If you're interviewing, camera's on.
Right.
Period. No questions.
Right. I have another one.
Oh, boy.
No, this is fun. The listeners are going to want to hear this. So one time earlier in my career, again, ironically at the same apparel company, this athletic apparel company, I was interviewing, this is for a very high-level executive role. And the candidate, I came out into the waiting area to escort him back to the team. And he brought his wife with him.
What?
Yes, he brought his wife with him. And she was sitting there. Now, this is back in the day when you had paper applications to fill out.
Sure.
And he had her filling it out for him.
No.
In the waiting room. Yes, don't do that. And another example, I was with an insurance organization, and it was a recently graduated college grad.
Oh, no. I know where this is going.
And they had their parent taking pictures of them posing with a thumbs up sign at the door. So leave your spouse, leave your friends, leave mommy and daddy, leave your bestie. I don't know. Leave your dog, everyone home.
Unless there was a specific invitation.
No.
Like sometimes we have... there will be a portion of the interview process where a spouse that would be especially relocating to the area with the candidate, there's a time and a place where a spouse may be invited.
Sure.
To participate in the interview process to a point. But yeah, unless there was a specifically worded invitation, that interview invite is for you and you alone.
Yes.
Things we shouldn't have to say, but here we are.
I know.
So, first impressions, anything else you think is worth sharing?
No, I'm trying to think. Okay, I have another one. So, again, earlier in my career.
Story time with Elizabeth. This is my favorite.
Okay, earlier in my career. Now, this was a marketing research firm. And we were hiring for people to assist with recruiting people to participate in focus groups. Okay. And this particular candidate was a no-call, no-show. That's another thing you never want to do.
Don't do that.
Don't no-call, no-show. You'd be surprised, even for very professional level positions, how many candidates do that.
Lots.
We call it ghosting. This particular candidate ghosted. Somehow, one of my employees, maybe they didn't notate it, I don't know properly, this same candidate after ghosting showed up, and I said, hey, you ghosted us before, you were no call, no show, so unfortunately we're not going to be able to proceed. So this particular candidate said, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. They give a very terrible sob story. Now this was the version of Elizabeth who was much more green and trusting. Now I'm hardened and I don't trust anyone. No, I'm just joking. But they said their house burnt down. It was terrible. I felt so bad. And I'm like, okay, please. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, so he didn't get the position. He didn't because there were other candidates more qualified. A few months later, he applies again under a different name, comes through. Yep.
What?
And I said, hey, I recognize you from before. And he said, no. So he was gaslighting me, telling me no. And then I sent him on his way, and he had explained to me, giving me a sob story, hey, you can't do this to me. My house just burnt down last week. Right. So he was a liar.
What?
Yes. So I just wanted to share another fun story.
No.
Don't lie.
Don't lie.
Just don't lie. That's the moral of the story, kids.
Again,
don't lie.
things we shouldn't have to say, but
Yes.
here we are.
Yes.
Okay. We've participated in, facilitated a lot of interviews.
True.
We've seen the good, bad, and the ugly, as we said before. What, in your mind, separates a good interview from a great interview?
Okay. Let's start with good. A good interview is you've done some research, you're dressed the part, you show up 5 minutes before, it's obvious that you have prepared yourself. Your resume looks slick. There are no typos. You have extra copies. You have questions prepared to ask the interview team at the end. You're not overly verbose in your responses. That's a good interview. A great interview, everything I just said, but crank it up a few notches. You're confident, but not cocky and arrogant. You are very articulate. You enunciate yourself clearly. You don't come in bad-mouthing, of course. I mean, that's just a basic. You don't ever want to bad-mouth anyone else but where you've worked. But you come in such a way that you can demonstrate that you truly do have a passion and understanding of what it is you are applying, the position, I should say, for which you're applying, by way of giving specific examples. Saying, just off the cuff, unrehearsed, if someone says something from the interview team and they share a story, you know what? Yeah, that reminds me of a time when I had to deal with ABC, XYZ, and here's how it turned out for me. I can totally see where you're coming from. If you come prepared with solutions, hey, I put a lot of thought into it. And I know, when I've been in a position where I've been responsible for whatever it is that you're interviewing for, here are some things that I've tried. Would you be open to, in the answers that you're naturally giving to the questions they ask, hey, here's an example of something I've done. And don't go on and on. You don't want to come across braggadocious. That's the worst thing you can do. But just truly be prepared so that you can speak organically and authentically about what you've actually done.
The other thing I would add that separates good from great is a acknowledgement of, I should say, your own blind spots.
Yes.
And I mean actual blind spots, not I worked BS too ones. Hard. This is not the place for humble brag. This is actually, what are your blind spots? What are the things? Because nobody's perfect. We know that. So what are the things that what is the self-awareness that you've developed? And what is your knowledge of the areas where you could use some development and you're continuing to develop? And what are you doing about them?
Right. The what are you doing about them is really important.
So please don't just go in and talk about your blind spots. Talk about your blind spots and what you're doing to address them.
Yes. I'm not really trying to tee you up, but to tease you, I should say. But could you maybe give an example of an actual blind spot of yours?
Yeah, it's something I did this morning, and I've been thinking about it ever since. We had our staff meeting this morning, and I have a tendency, because I am very logistically brained, I immediately jump to feasibility and process of a particular idea. And if I can't make heads or tails of it immediately, then I will start to write it off as a bad idea. And
I'm shocked.
Are you actually?
No, that was sarcasm. Continue.
So it's something that I have been working on to there's very much an internal conversation that I have to have with myself of it's just an idea. It's for the purpose of brainstorming. This is not set in stone, something we're automatically going to do. It's also, half-baked because it's literally coming out now in this group setting. So why would it have details attached? And there's going to be, especially the way that our team works, I know to be true that when an idea gets thrown out to the group, we're never going to be like, that's a great idea, let's start doing it tomorrow. Like, that doesn't happen. So, but in my brain it does. So it's a lot of internal conversation with myself when that happens, and I feel my brain starting to like run sirens, like, no, be quiet. This,
Right.
like, it's just an idea. Like, hear them out, let them talk about what they want to do, and then if this is something that the group decides they want to pursue, like, there's an appropriate time to raise concern, and it's, as we're feeling out the process and what this could actually look like. But that shutting down immediately, I've got to give myself a little internal talking to.
Okay, that's good. So if you were interviewing for a position, you would probably articulate that in such a way to say, me being so logistically hardwired, being able to go with the flow for creative brainstorming
Can be difficult.
Right.
Yeah, because I immediately go to, how do we make this? I focus less on the what and more on the how.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And you could, in using your example, you could say, however, one thing that, knowing that about myself, one thing I do is I have a few different red flags that I look out for where I know a conversation might trigger me, and I am able to then catch it and talk myself down from it so I can remain more open.
Yeah.
That
it could be
an
as simple
example.
as like, I give myself a count to 10 before I respond. And that usually gives my brain enough time to like,
That's a good one. Yes.
the woosah, if you will, in
Right.
my internal. Slow your roll.
That's
Amanda.
a really good one.
The last thing that we want to cover is the portion of the program where the candidate would be able to ask questions of the potential employer. This is a really crucial part of the interview process that I think some people take for granted because they focus on, very tactical things related to the position. So, and this is something that we are actually going to make available via download. We're going to put together a list of these questions that you can download to use for your next interview, but some suggestions that we'll share with you. I actually keep a running list of these. I do a lot of like resume reviews and interview advice and things for family and friends as they ask me to. So this is something that I've sort of collected over time, some questions that I think are important to ask. So I'll share some of these. So the first one is, what was the last change that was implemented here as a result of employee feedback? And what was the outcome?
I like that.
Why do you ask this question? You ask this question to, one thing we talked about, if you listen to the episode where we reviewed SHRM Talent conference takeaways, one of the big themes this year was around psychologically safe workplaces.
Yes.
This is one of those things that speaks to, is this a psychologically safe work environment where employee input and feedback is valued and acted upon, not just, as we like to say, it's not just lip service where, oh yeah, we'll take your feedback and then nothing ever happens with it.
Right.
So
Exactly.
I'd like to get some examples of how you've taken that feedback and what you've done with it. What is something the person in this role could do within the first few months that would have the greatest impact?
That's a good one.
This is a question we like to just share as part of our recruitment process. When we're working with candidates, we like to be very upfront about, hey, look, within the first 6 months, they're going to be looking for you to do these things, within the first year, within the first 2 to 3 years. So we lay that out, but not everybody does. So I think this is doing a couple different things, but one, really importantly, what's the measure of success look like early on? Because in their minds, they have, we're going to know if this was a good hire if they accomplish X, Y, Z.
Sure.
So why would you go into a position willingly not knowing those things?
Right.
Not knowing the measuring stick that they're using. That could present a lot of problems later on.
Because sadly, I would say probably most organizations are not very articulate or intentional about communicating those things.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. Think about people in this role in the past. what differentiated the good from the great? Obviously, if this is a brand new position, can't really ask that question.
Right.
Which leads me to another question, is this a new position? Is this something that's existed? Usually that gets shared at some point in the process, but make sure you're listening for that before you ask this question.
Yes. Which, real quick, you saying that is another big don't for candidates. When candidates very evidently weren't listening and they ask a question at the end of the interview about something that was already covered. So
that's never a good look.
Yes.
Yeah. So think about what differentiated good from great.
I like that.
Again, just kind of understanding what's been successful and what they're looking for moving forward. Give an example of a situation where you directly saw the organization's core values exhibited. So this gives the interview team an opportunity to do some storytelling and share. It gives you some insight into the organizational culture, and are these core values things that are actually lived out day in and day out with this organization, or is it just lip service? Are they, fancy words and phrases that look nice on a website?
Right.
What does the onboarding process look like? If I were to be hired for this position, walk me through what the onboarding would look like. And what you want to look for in that process, I think, can boil down to 2 words: intention and structure.
Yes, yes.
Which are 2 things that are most oftenly missing in onboarding processes. But is there intention behind what they're doing? Is there a purpose to every single thing? Are they making sure they're maximizing your time as a brand new employee? AKA, if you're sitting in a room filling out paperwork, if that's how they start, well, of course you'll have your paperwork. Okay, guys, that can be done ahead of time.
No, pre-boarding.
There's no reason that can't be part of the pre-boarding process. So looking for how they're intentionally building an onboarding experience, that can be really telling as well for the experience that you'll have, once you're on the team and kind of what being part of that team is all about. I love this question. If you could snap your fingers and magically fix any problem in this organization right now, money, time, it's not an issue. Snap your fingers and problem solved. What would that problem be?
I like that question. I've never asked that one.
That can be really telling, because a lot of times it'll kind of catch people off guard.
Right.
Because you're asking them to show some cracks.
Yes.
Because again, just like no candidate is perfect, no organization is perfect either.
Yes.
So there's cracks, promise, they're there. It's how honest are we about our blind spots as an organization? That's extremely important.
It is important
for them to have knowledge of and to be able to communicate. If I were to ask an employee in whatever department you're going into what it's like to work here, what would they say to me? We ask this question of our clients when we're preparing to launch a search. This speaks to company culture, and it's always interesting, especially if you know someone who works in the department or you know somebody who works in the organization and you do ask them, it's interesting to see if there's a gap between what the hiring manager says and what your friend or your family member who actually works there says. Because if there's a gap, that's usually a sign of a red flag.
Yes, big red flag.
And then the last one I'll share is, what are the personality traits that work well here? Sometimes it's easier for them to articulate what doesn't work. Right. So you could really ask it either way, because usually it's, here's the good, and whatever doesn't work is the opposite of that.
Yes, I know.
So however you want to articulate that, I think getting an understanding. Again, these are questions. A lot of these questions are ones that are designed to speak to the culture of the organization, because there's tons of questions out there that you can find that speak to the tactical side of a position. But I think those cultural questions gives you insight to a lot of potential issues down the road. Because I think, reasons why people leave positions a lot of times tie much more closely to cultural issues and sense of belonging than the tactical stuff.
The sense of belonging, yes, because it's all about the relationships that exist or not in the workplace.
Yep, exactly.
And if you don't feel like you belong, you want to go somewhere where you do.
Yes. So we will make that downloadable resource available to you to use for your next interview. And spoiler alert, if you're an employer, I'd also maybe download that sheet and take a look and prepare some answers. Make sure your hiring teams are prepared to answer those questions, because they're good ones. And I think as candidates become more organizational culture savvy as far as what they're looking for, you're going to start to see these questions, hear these questions more and more. So if you don't have answers prepared, now's your opportunity.
And I would say yes, and think about how you would answer those questions as an employer and try to find ways to sprinkle in a few little nuggets of those details when you're talking to the candidate about your opportunity.
Yeah.
Not just the good, like you said, let them know what some of the cracks are so they can
and
come
how
in.
you're working on them.
Right, how you're working on them so they can come in with their eyes wide open and really get excited
Yep.
about how to contribute.
Paint a complete picture.
Yes.
That's what we were looking to do on both sides of the equation.
Right, definitely.
Yep. That's it. That concludes episode
know.
6.
I think we did it.
We did it.
We did.
Yes.
And I have to tell you, I came in here on a sugar high, and now I'm, you know,
feeling better now?
I'm feeling better.
I'm glad.
And I'll tell you what, I hope that the tips that our listeners got were as sweet as the sugar that I ate on the cookie that I wolfed down before we started this.
Perfect. Yes. So thank you again for joining us for the aha moment. We are going to be having another guest presenter on for our next episode. We're going to be featuring Casey Lucas Zumagala from Click Pragmatics, who's going to be talking about a topic that we touched a little bit on here today, first impressions, both on the employer and the employee side. Casey specializes in nonverbal communication.
Perfect.
So all the things you're saying with your body that you're not necessarily saying with your mouth, those matter too.
They do.
So Casey's going to be talking a little bit about that with us next time. So please stay tuned. And if you have not subscribed yet, I highly recommend that you do, just so you stay up to date on all of the new releases that come out. You can also check out our website at decisionassociates.net. And that's a wrap on episode 6.
Awesome. Well, let's clap.
Our round of applause.
Yeah, I think we did a great job.
We did.
And hopefully all of you got a little something that you can take away and apply.
We'll catch you next time.